Tonight, we delve into the fascinating lives and remarkable resilience of medieval peasants. These unsung heroes defied the harsh elements to survive some of the harshest nights in history. They employed creative insulation methods and communal sleeping practices, showcasing their perseverance, resourcefulness, and resolve. So, before you settle in, kindly show your support by liking the video and subscribing, only if you genuinely appreciate my content. Share your location and current time in the comments section, as it's always intriguing to connect with viewers worldwide. Now, lower the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for a soothing background noise, and let's embark on this evening's journey together. When envisioning medieval times, one might think of knights, feasts, and festivals. However, for commoners, winter was less about festivities and more about survival. It was a recurring challenge that tested their resilience annually, akin to a stern teacher offering no second chances. Imagine residing in a modest abode, constructed from mud and sticks, with walls so thin that the outside sounds penetrated effortlessly. There were no luxuries like insulation or proper windows, just a small opening covered with animal hide. Your dwelling's interior temperature barely surpassed that of the biting cold outside. Nights were especially arduous, as darkness enveloped the surroundings, the wind howled menacingly, and the hearth struggled to provide warmth. Despite its efforts, the fire mostly roasted the inhabitants rather than heating the room. The person closest seemed to accidentally invade others' personal space with their toes. If you were at the opposite end of the room, it was almost like camping outdoors, but with less appealing snacks. Peasants didn't possess luxurious fur coats or down blankets. Their attire mainly consisted of coarse wool tunics and perhaps a goat odor-infused cloak, layered in hopes of retaining warmth, similar to an onion. Unfortunately, this tactic was not very effective. Forget about cozying up under soft quilts. Beds were often just sacks filled with hay or straw, sometimes with a sprinkling of old rushes and a few fleas for added company. The concept of luxury did not exist in medieval peasant life. Enduring the cold was not merely uncomfortable, but also perilous, as frostbite, hypothermia, and the risk of freezing to death were constant threats, particularly for the young and elderly. Waking up alive each morning was considered a small victory, possibly celebrated with a less frozen turnip for breakfast. Surviving a medieval winter was not about comfort, but about enduring the harsh conditions by layering clothes, seeking warmth from livestock, and hoping to avoid waking up with icicles on one's eyebrows. The challenges of winter were only the beginning of the hardships faced by medieval peasants. If you complain about a drafty apartment due to a poorly closing window, consider the medieval peasants who lived in homes resembling energetic wind tunnels with roofs. Most peasant houses were constructed using wattle and daub technique, sticks interlaced like a large basket and coated with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal waste, including dung, which served as an inexpensive and effective insulator. In addition to the readily available harsh winter storms, the walls of the one-room homes were unable to withstand the cold wind, which easily seeped through cracks and gaps, preventing any comfort. Privacy and warmth were lacking in these homes, but they built character for the inhabitants. The thatched roofs, while charming, would sag and leak after exposure to rain and snow, allowing wildlife to enter occasionally. Windows were small, covered with animal hides or shutters due to the high cost of glass. peasant homes had dirt floors that turned muddy during heavy rain or snow. Despite the challenges, the medieval peasants were resilient, using moss and rags to seal gaps and huddling together for warmth. Their resourcefulness, determination, and some sheep grease applied to the walls were their only defenses against the harsh elements. Involving mud and goat hair, this situation was at least comical, if your teeth weren't chattering too much. Besides the freezing air, medieval peasants had to combat an unexpected foe from beneath, the frozen ground itself. Back then, floors were not really floors. They were just somewhat flatter spots of soil within your dwelling. Perhaps, if you were fortunate, someone had scattered straw or old rushes to provide a sense of comfort. However, it was clear that you were merely a cold, hard ground away from the insult. The cold was unyielding and crept up from the earth like a malevolent specter, penetrating through the straw into your bones and very soul. Dropping anything on the floor during winter nights meant it instantly became part of the permafrost. Medieval peasants attempted to confront this dire challenge in various ways. One approach was laying thick straw mats on the ground if you could afford it. More realistically, if you managed to gather enough straw from your neighbor's fields without being caught, you might have a decent insulating barrier. Yet, the straw flattened quickly, grew moldy even quicker, and contributed a crunchy soundtrack to your already sorrowful nights. Some households opted to cover the dirt with dried rushes instead. Periodically, they would add fresh rushes on top without removing the old ones. This practice gave rise to an intriguing ecosystem of decomposing plants, fleas, and various mystery creatures. Essentially, it served as medieval carpet padding, albeit one that was alive, slightly damp, and emitted a scent reminiscent of a wet dog. Beds, for those fortunate enough to possess them, did not offer much solace beyond being just a bit more than. Medieval peasants used wooden frames filled with more straw or hay instead of cozy mattresses. These makeshift beds provided little warmth against the cold coming from below, leading to a night of uncomfortable tossing and turning to maintain circulation and avoid freezing. Survival on the icy ground was more about enduring discomfort than finding rest. Waking up with all toes intact was more important than having dreams or a soft surface to sleep on. Those who managed this feat were considered to be doing well. During winter, the most significant asset in a medieval home was the hearth, a stubborn fire pit that fought against the cold, darkness, and dreariness of the era. Positioned at the center of nearly every peasant's dwelling, the hearth was a simple setup, comprising a basic pit or pile of stones, with smoldering logs emitting smoke into the room. Unlike modern fireplaces with chimneys, these setups let smoke escape through small openings in the roof or walls, or sometimes directly into the living space. Despite the challenges, the smoke from the hearth played a dual role, causing discomfort in breathing, but also serving as a way to rid the home of fleas and other pests. While not perfect for health, the smoke served as a form of pest control for the medieval household. The kitchen wasn't just a place for warmth. It also served as a source of light and entertainment, akin to a medieval version of television. People gathered around the fire to share stories, gossip, or simply gaze into the flames, as there were limited options after sunset. Ensuring the fire stayed alight was not merely a preference, but a necessity. Allowing the fire to extinguish at night was inviting the cold to take over. Relighting a fire in winter was not as simple as using a match. It required flint, steel, kindling, and numerous prayers. Each family member had a role to play, fueling the flames, tending to the embers, and adding wood. It was a constant struggle against the chilling cold that aimed to extinguish them. The hearth didn't guarantee survival, but without it, survival was impossible. Although the fire may have been smoky and inconsistent, in medieval winters it symbolized hope. Peasants of that era feared nothing more than the fire dying out overnight, knowing that the cold would swiftly engulf them. Restarting a fire from scratch was not just inconvenient but perilous, given the absence of matches or lighters. Rekindling a fire meant relying on flint and steel to produce a spark, which had to be nurtured with care, and any remaining dry kindling. Picture attempting this task in the freezing darkness, half asleep with icy fingers. To enhance their motivation, peasants introduced a hungry wolf howling in the distance. They devised a clever strategy known as fire banking. This technique involved carefully burying the embers beneath a layer of ash before bedtime to keep them smoldering until morning. When executed correctly, this method allowed them to easily reignite the fire the next day, preventing frostbite. However, if done incorrectly, mornings would be chillier and more unpleasant. Fire banking was a skill passed down through generations, with each family having their own unique approach. Some believed in using only dry ash, while others thought a bit of moisture was necessary. Techniques varied from tightly packing the embers to allowing them some air. This diversity of methods often led to lively debates, akin to modern-day arguments about grilling techniques, but with higher stakes for survival. Occasionally, even with fire banking, external factors like a strong wind or a clumsy animal could extinguish the fire. Thus, some families took turns monitoring the embers during the night, resembling a medieval version of adjusting a thermostat in one's sleep. Ultimately, fire banking was not about conquering nature, but rather about prolonging warmth for a few more crucial hours. Waking up to even a single remaining ember was considered a triumph, enough to face another day in the relentless battle against the cold. In medieval times, the adage, "the more the merrier," was not just about festivities. It was a vital strategy for surviving the harsh winters. In the midst of a crackling fire and chilling winds, one reliable source of warmth was found: each other. Personal space was ignored as families, neighbors, livestock, and even a confused goose huddled together for warmth. Privacy was non-existent, and comfort was not the priority on cold nights. The main goal was to avoid waking up frozen. People crowded into the warmest corner of the house with whatever cloth they could find, creating a snug, snoring human stack. The youngest nestled between parents. Grandparents cozied up on the outer layers, and even unexpected guests like Cousin Ethel found a spot. The luckiest slept in the middle, surrounded by body heat, while those on the edge endured the cold like sleeping next to a freezer door. Moving during the night could mean displacing someone into the draft, earning the mover the title of the family villain. Sharing bedding, like a communal straw mattress, was common, despite the lack of hygiene resulting in less than pleasant odors. In the face of frostbite, preferences were set aside for survival. Body heat was crucial and strategically placed, with the strongest individuals forming a shield against the cold, while babies and older family members were kept at the center for warmth. They were valuable sources of warmth indeed. It wasn't all about staying alive, though. As time passed, it evolved into a routine, a way for families to bond. Cold evenings spent together led to storytelling, singing, and many intriguing conversations muffled beneath a shared woolen blanket. So, the next time your sibling takes your blanket or your dog takes over the bed, just think, at least you're not contending for space with a snoring uncle and a judgmental goat. If you find modern roommates challenging, medieval peasants would like to introduce you to their winter companions. From cows and goats to pigs and chickens, any living creature with a bit of body heat was welcome indoors. Having animals inside was not just a quirky village custom, it was crucial for survival. Livestock provided warmth, and in a poorly insulated dwelling where the wind was louder than your growling stomach, every degree of warmth was precious. Additionally, having your goat next to you slightly reduced the risk of it being stolen by a neighbor in the dark of night, killing 2 birds with 1 smelly stone. During the night, the house turned into a lively furnace. Chickens found corners to nest in. Pigs grunted near the fireplace, and cows sprawled against the walls, chewing their cud as if they owned the place. It wasn't glamorous, quite the opposite. If you've experienced being in a car during a summer road trip with someone who skipped a shower, picture that. Except it's a cow, it's winter, and there's nowhere else for it to go. The odors were memorable. By spring, the scent of a shared winter was potent. Lighting a candle became unnecessary. Your nose was already on a roller coaster ride. Yet, medieval peasants grew accustomed to the varied smells. They didn't complain much, because they knew one harsh reality. The more animals inside, the more warmth they had to endure the bitter cold. In the morning, there were fewer cold toes to deal with. Various animals occupied specific places in the sleeping area. The largest and warmest, the cows, typically occupied the central spot close to the family. Goats were allowed in the vicinity for their warmth, as they were known to find their way inside anyway. Chickens perched in the rafters or old baskets, while pigs were indifferent and would settle wherever they pleased, often in the middle of the floor. Although sharing a bedroom with livestock posed risks, such as being woken up by a chicken perched on your head or stepping on something suspicious in the morning, medieval mornings were full of surprises. Despite the disturbances, peasants recognized the crucial need for warmth. Cows provided essential heat, even if unwillingly, as the peasants knew that cold weather could be deadly. In medieval times, practicality trumped fashion, and peasants prioritized staying alive over looking good. Layering up was key, starting with a linen undertunic, followed by a thicker woolen tunic, leggings, a rough cloak, and, if fortunate, a patchwork sheepskin for added warmth. Boots were considered a luxury, so many peasants wrapped their feet in multiple layers for warmth. In the past, people used pieces of fabric or worn-out rags to stuff inside wooden shoes to keep warm. Adding more layers was the solution if the cold was still felt, with the hope of avoiding frostbite. Washing clothes during winter meant carrying them to a frozen stream, breaking through the ice, and waiting for days for them to dry. Most peasants chose to endure the smell of smoke, sweat, and animals, rather than risk freezing. The accumulation of dirt and grease actually provided insulation, keeping body heat in. Accessories such as hats, scarves, and gloves were highly valued for survival. Gloves were often made from scraps of leather or fabric, resembling puppet costumes more than fashionable items. Children were bundled up heavily to retain body warmth. Functionality trumped style back then. Complaining about layering up on a cold day today pales in comparison to how medieval peasants had to dress, looking like walking piles of laundry. Dirt was not just something to wash away. It served as a practical survival aid. Embracing grime was not a sign of defeat, but a strategic move. The winter presented a specific challenge: heat loss. While clean clothes, especially fresh linen, were breathable, they were not effective at keeping one warm in extremely cold temperatures. To combat this issue, the buildup of dirt, body oils, and mud on clothing acted as a natural armor, filling in the tiny gaps in the fabric and making the clothes more wind-resistant. This was a form of medieval weatherproofing, albeit with a noticeable odor. Peasants avoided washing their clothes too often in winter, as they believed it could make them sick, preferring to maintain a protective layer of filth. Bathing and doing laundry were infrequent tasks, with soap use reserved for special occasions. Additionally, peasants would layer their clothes without changing the underlying garments, creating a historical timeline of the past few weeks through stains and marks. While outsiders may have viewed medieval peasants as neglecting hygiene, they understood that their grimy clothes were essential protection against frostbite. In a world where everyone smelled, prioritizing warmth over fragrance was a practical choice. During medieval times, maintaining a thick layer of dirt and grease during winter was not seen as unhygienic, but rather considered fashionable and practical. Peasants did not enjoy luxurious bedding, but instead slept on simple wooden frames covered with straw or hay. The bedding was uncomfortable, lumpy, and emitted a barnyard scent. Some peasants even skipped the wooden frame, opting to sleep on straw directly on the dirt floor. This sleeping arrangement was not only uncomfortable, but also temporary, as the straw would flatten, grow moldy, attract bugs, and eventually need to be replaced. Rushes, another bedding option, were sometimes mixed with herbs to mask the smell of livestock. However, they quickly became soiled and muddy, integrating with the household's dirty interior. Straw bedding in medieval times was a haven for dirt, food scraps, and various unwelcome guests like fleas and lice. Despite the discomfort, these beds provided essential warmth by insulating against the chilly ground and retaining shared body heat, while modern mattresses offer comfort. Imagining a medieval peasant looking up from history with a grin and reminiscing about a simpler time is eye-opening. Living in a fragile home made of sticks and mud, peasants battled winter not just from outside elements, but also from within, using any material they could find to fill cracks and gaps. Sealing up these homes required creativity, with gaps filled by moss, straw, cloth scraps, grass, or even animal hair. Some individuals went to great lengths, adding layers of mud and dung to walls as a winter project. The image of a person standing in the cold, plastering manure on their home, while affirming it as a form of luxury, is both amusing and revealing of the hardships faced during that era. Roof leaks were a common problem during medieval times. Thatch, despite being affordable, was not very waterproof, especially after enduring rain and snow over time. Peasants used various materials like cloth, reeds, or even turf to repair the holes in their roofs, resulting in a mismatched appearance. Doors and windows were considered a luxury, often made of basic wooden planks held together by iron nails. Windows were covered with animal hides or cloth soaked in animal fat to keep out drafts and add a unique smell to the interior. Despite efforts to stay warm, the cold would always find a way in, keeping residents on edge. Medieval peasants, determined and resourceful, endured harsh winters by continuously patching up their homes with whatever materials they could find. To combat the biting cold that kept them awake at night, peasants would take turns sleeping and staying awake to tend to the fire and seal any drafts. This survival tactic, though not organized, allowed them to endure the long winter nights. In order to rest for a short period of time in the cold, vigilant attention to the fire was essential. Restarting the fire was as challenging as coaxing a stubborn donkey to dance, requiring someone to constantly monitor the embers. Families took turns to ensure the fire stayed lit, taking shifts where they dozed briefly before being awoken to tend to the fire, careful not to disturb the animals nearby. The rotation was far from glamorous, with no modern comforts like night vision goggles or late-night snacks, just tired bodies and growing irritation towards the loudest snorer. Even children were involved in maintaining the fire, understanding the importance of everyone contributing in winter. Elder family members, relying on experience and struggling with arthritis, stayed by the fire for longer periods. Despite the difficulty of getting quality rest due to constant movement and noise, the system ensured that the fire remained burning and the family stayed warm. So, next time you complain about adjusting the thermostat or attending to a pet, consider the medieval peasant tending to the fire in the middle of the night, wondering if their toes were at risk of freezing. During medieval times, peasants faced the challenge of surviving frigid temperatures by not only relying on clothing and fires, but also adapting their breathing techniques. The risk of inhaling cold air deeply was understood as a threat to one's health due to the potential of developing pneumonia. Thus, peasants mastered the concept of what could be termed as survival breathing, emphasizing shallow, slow, and nasal breathing to slightly warm the air before it reached their lungs. Despite not being foolproof, this method was preferred to avoid falling ill during the winter months. Some even resorted to using parts of their garments as a barrier to shield their breath while sleeping, leading to waking up with damp fabric on their faces. Children were educated early on about these strategies, as parents discouraged rapid breathing indoors and emphasized the importance of adapting to the cold through various means aside from just clothing. Enduring the challenges of medieval winters, including uncomfortable clothing and sharing sleeping quarters with smelly animals, contributed to character development in a unique and demanding manner. During nighttime, lying in straw bedding under layers of cloaks next to a warm cow, breathing had to be precise. The peasants practiced slow, controlled, nose-only breaths, resembling a harsh, medieval yoga retreat, devoid of inspirational sayings, but filled with frostbite. This method may not have been flashy, but it was effective in surviving the brutal winter nights. Peasants discovered a valuable tactic in their battle against the cold: a full stomach. Consuming a hearty meal before bedtime was more effective than wearing a scratchy woolen cloak. Calories equated to warmth. The body generated heat by digesting a heavy meal. This simple concept of medieval thermodynamics involved eating a substantial meal to stay warm and possibly avoid freezing to death overnight. The preferred foods for peasants included thick stews with root vegetables like turnips, onions, and parsnips, and grains such as oat porridge, barley gruel, or dense rye bread. Occasionally, they would enjoy salted pork or dried sausage if they were fortunate. These meals were not presented aesthetically, but were one large, homely dish meant to sustain them throughout the night. It wasn't solely about eating large quantities, but choosing foods that would slowly release energy throughout the night. A consistent source of warmth was provided by the digestive process. The value of fatty foods was especially highlighted, not only for their energy content, but also because fat burns more slowly compared to lean meat. Indulging in a hearty meal of stew, bread, and a generous amount of lard was deemed a luxury during the peak of medieval winter. Parents made sure that even the most selective children ate heartily, with little concern for individual preferences. In the harsh but effective parenting style of the Middle Ages, there was no room for fussiness like little Thomas disliking turnips. You either consumed the turnips or endured a chilly night rueing the absence of turnips. Partaking in a heavy meal before bedtime had its own risks. While it provided warmth, it also opened the door to a night filled with vivid and strange dreams, triggered by a stomach processing a substantial amount of cabbages. Was it a worthwhile trade-off? Undoubtedly. Peasants weren't striving for gourmet dining experiences. Their primary goal was survival. If that entailed going to bed satiated, swollen, and snuggled next to a warm cow, while breathing softly through their noses, it was just another typical night in their relentless pursuit to witness another frosty dawn. Centuries before the advent of modern conveniences like electric blankets and sophisticated heated mattress pads, medieval peasants needed to employ inventive techniques to stay warm at night. This is where the unassuming haybox and the seemingly glamorous heated stone emerged as the unsung heroes of winter. Let's delve into the haybox first. Despite its rustic appearance, the concept was remarkably ingenious. Peasants would insulate a sturdy wooden box with a thick layer of hay and use it to store pre-cooked food, keeping it warm for extended periods. Whether it was leftover stew or piping hot porridge, placing it in the haybox and covering it would maintain its temperature sufficiently for a late-night snack without the need to rekindle the fire. These hayboxes acted as medieval predecessors to modern slow cookers. Indeed, peasants didn't only rely on food for warmth. They discovered that just like hay could retain heat for cooking, it could also keep heat from rocks. This sparked the era of heated stones. Before bedtime, a person, likely the unfortunate child who lost a family debate, would select a smooth stone and toss it into the heart of the fire. Once the stone was heated to near unbearable levels, balancing between being useful and dangerously hot, they would retrieve it using a stick or old tongs. The stone, still emanating comforting warmth, would then be cautiously wrapped in cloth, placed in a clay pot, and hidden under the hay in the mattress or at the bed's end. This makeshift medieval heating pad was prepared to combat the icy cold. Naturally, there were dangers involved. Improperly wrapping the stone could lead to a small fire, and if the stone slipped and landed on a foot, winter injuries wouldn't solely be from slipping on ice. However, when everything went smoothly, the stone provided valuable warmth for hours. It may not have been lavish, but for someone living in a chilly dwelling, luxury simply meant not waking up with frozen icicles hanging from their nose. In the array of tools for surviving a medieval winter, a heated rock nestled in hay might not seem fancy. But for peasants grasping at any source of warmth, it was a minor miracle. In a peasant's rustic abode, the hearth served more than just cooking purposes. It was akin to a family member. A finicky, smoky, occasionally uncooperative family member, no doubt, yet undeniably crucial for survival, particularly when bedtime arrived. Sleeping closest to the fire offered the best chance of waking up without freezing. Thus, sleeping arrangements were not based on personal choice, but on strategic placement. Priority went to infants, the elderly, and those who were ill or weak. Following them, parents, older children, and stronger adults positioned themselves like layers of human insulation. Being placed near the fire was not just a gesture of kindness, but a necessity for survival. Babies produced fragile heat, while elders held valuable family knowledge and juicy gossip, ensuring their warmth was vital. However, it wasn't all about enjoying the fire's warmth. Being too close risked singed hair or smoldering clothes, while being too far meant enduring freezing conditions. It was a careful balance, close enough to feel the fire's heat, but not so close to end up looking like a half-cooked meal. The fire's warmth was unevenly distributed, mainly heating those directly in front of it, leaving others vying for the narrow heat cone like cold lizards seeking a sunbeam. If lucky enough to sleep facing the fire, one side would be blissfully warm, while the other would be frozen solid. Pets and livestock also squeezed in. A dog might position itself dangerously close to the fire with a wagging tail, and chickens perched on hearthstones, acting as tiny guardians of warmth. Each crackle of the logs and shift of glowing embers brought a small reassurance. You were still alive. The warmth still lingered briefly. Peasants settled into an uneasy slumber, comforted by the crackling and sizzling of the fire, each exhale creating misty clouds in the cold air outside the circle of light. It was not ideal. It was not cozy, but it was survival, clutching onto heat by the glow of the embers. In the medieval era, nobody endured winter in isolation unless they wished to resemble a fashionable frozen statue by January. Enduring winter was not only a matter for one family, but a collaborative effort within the village. It was a messy, noisy, and communal endeavor, where each person's warmth and existence relied on one another. The peasants were aware that during the harsh winter months, a roaring fire and a stack of hay could only provide limited relief. If a neighbor's home fell dark, it caught attention. If the smoke from old Tom's chimney ceased to rise, someone would investigate. This wasn't solely because Tom owed a chicken, but because survival was intertwined with community. Villages would appoint informal winter watchers, usually the young or elderly, who couldn't tend to the fields but could monitor for signs of illness, absence from the market, or unusual quietness in a household. They served as a medieval form of neighborhood watch, without the bright vests, but with more sheep. If a family's fire extinguished, it caused near panic. A caring neighbor would hurry over with a hot ember wrapped in cloth, or even offer shelter in their own smoky, crowded dwelling for the night, although it meant cramming 4 more bodies into an already confined area. It was preferable to discovering frozen companions in spring. Shared food supplies became vital. In harsh winters, villages would sometimes resort to their last supplies of salted meat, grain, and dried vegetables. It was a somber act of generosity. Although resources were scarce, a few communal meals could determine whether the community would struggle through the season or not. Even the children were aware of the gravity of the situation. They assisted with wood delivery, shared embers, and relayed urgent messages when help was needed. When winter arrived, everyone, regardless of size or fatigue, pitched in. Medieval villages weren't always harmonious. Conflicts arose over land, livestock, or borrowed items, but as the cold nights set in, old disputes were often set aside. The importance of unity was evident, because the next day it could be anyone requiring assistance. In the chilling midst of winter, the village transformed into a resilient and determined family, despite occasional dysfunction, frequent humor, and an unwavering commitment to survival together, step by step. When faced with the unforgiving winter cold, medieval peasants did more than wrap themselves in cloaks or tend to the fire. They turned to prayer. When the wind howled like wolves outside their flimsy walls, and the fire dwindled to faint embers, seeking divine intervention seemed essential. Back then, faith wasn't just a weekly ritual. It was entwined with every icy breath. Before seeking warmth under layers of straw and rough wool, families would gather to hastily pray for the fire to endure, the roof to hold, and their toes to remain unscathed until morning. Saints were not just distant figures, but frontline defenders against winter's hazards. For instance, Saint Simé was invoked to ward off throat ailments, a significant concern when a breath of frigid air could lead to debilitating coughs. Not only was he perceived as a joyful gift-giver in later stories, but he was also relied upon to shield homes from abrupt devastation during the scarce and fatal months. Daily survival was intertwined with various superstitions. Certain households would sprinkle holy water near the fireplace before sleeping, in the hopes of warding off malevolent spirits or mischievous drafts. Others would mark their doorways with blessed chalk following specific feast days, imploring for warmth and fortune to enter. Candles were also significant. Special vigil candles, often blessed by the local priest or the most devout elderly woman in the community, were at times left burning all night as a flickering entreaty against the frigid darkness encroaching on the walls. Inevitably, no sincere winter supplication was complete without accompanying vows. Dear Lord, if you guide us through this night, the first promise to show more kindness to my neighbor, even the one who persistently pilfers our turnips. Faith was not a distant solace. It was a pressing daily dialogue. The peasants sought not luxury, but merely survival. A bit of warmth, a bit of sustenance, and one more day to endure until spring thawed the frozen grip on their modest hamlets. It was a simple, unfiltered hope, whispered into the smoky eaves, woven into breathless pleas, and tucked beneath scratchy blankets that somehow carried them through the unforgiving, unending nights of winter. Despite the resourcefulness, prayers, and resilience exhibited by medieval peasants in facing winter, the harsh reality was chilling. At times, their efforts fell short, and when winter prevailed, it did not just claim a few hapless individuals. It engulfed entire families, whole communities, engulfing them in silence beneath a thick blanket of snow and ice. Certain winters proved particularly severe, such as the notorious Great Famine Winter of 1315, when crops were ruined by rains, livestock perished, and the freezing temperatures ravaged. In the midst of harsh temperatures, life became increasingly challenging and dire for many. Desperation drove individuals to extreme measures, such as consuming leather, bark, and, in some dreadful cases, resorting to cannibalism. The ability to maintain a fire was not merely a convenience, but often a matter of life and death. Families gathered tightly for warmth, knowing it might be their final moments together. In some instances, entire households were discovered still intertwined in frozen embraces come spring, their last efforts to share warmth evident. Harsh weather conditions could lead to the collapse of homes, resulting in tragic consequences in the dead of night. Seeking refuge from neighbors, although essential, was not always achievable, as everyone struggled to survive. The cold environment also facilitated the spread of diseases like pneumonia and bronchitis, claiming lives swiftly. Frostbite was another silent threat, causing individuals to lose extremities as a sacrifice for survival. The acceptance of death as a familiar presence during winters added a haunting aspect to their reality. Despite the unrelenting challenges, medieval peasants persevered, showing resilience and determination to hold on to life. no matter the cost. Despite the lone ember flickering in the hearth and a solitary breath visible in the icy air, there remained a struggle worthy of perseverance. While reflecting on medieval peasants, the resilient survivors enduring harsh winters, it is easy to focus solely on their challenges: weathered hands, frost-bitten toes, and smoke-filled hovels. Yet, beneath these hardships lies a profound essence. Their enduring resilience and unwavering tenacity form a potent legacy. Lacking modern comforts like central heating, insulated jackets, or plush mattresses, they faced uncertainty without assuming survival until spring. However, what they possessed and bequeathed was a blueprint for resilience. Each makeshift mattress, stoked fire, and packed wall crevice showcased human resourcefulness amidst adversity. Rather than succumb to despair when faced with insurmountable odds, they adapted and gleaned wisdom from nature, peers, and harsh winter experiences. Their interconnected communities were forged on shared survival principles, emphasizing caring for the ill, pooling scarce resources, and reciprocity. By embracing the idea that weathering winter required collective effort, they relied on each other and integrated prayers into their routines, not solely out of fear, but hope. This enduring hope, albeit fragile and steadfast, sustained them through the darkest nights with the belief that warmth and light were on the horizon. Their perseverance and uncelebrated triumphs ensured future generations not only survived, but flourished. Through incremental progress, they persevered, night by chilling night. Advancing civilization, they braved harsh winters that their forebears could barely endure, until warmth and comfort shifted from distant aspirations to common expectations. Their determination, perseverance, and creativity have become integral to the fabric of our present-day existence. Each snug blanket, every cozy house, and all the leisurely winter evenings spent drinking tea and soft lighting bear the mark of numerous medieval peasants who stood firm against the cold. So, when the wind howls outside your insulated window, perhaps take a moment to acknowledge them. The unsung, courageous individuals who transformed trembling survival into an enduring heritage. One spark, one breath, one resolute heartbeat at a time. Anne Boleyn entered the world without a regal crown or armies at her command. Born around 1501, possibly in Blickling Hall or Hea Castle, she was the offspring of Thomas Boleyn, an enterprising diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard, a noblewoman with influential family connections. In the vast world of Tudor society, Anne's arrival barely caused a stir. However, from these unassuming origins, something remarkable was blossoming. A life that would eventually alter the trajectory of English history. From a young age, Anne stood out not for her wealth, but for her intellect. She was sharp-witted, spirited, and evidently captivating. Recognizing her potential, her family sent her to the continent, where her true education began. Initially, she served under Margaret of Austria at the opulent court of the Netherlands, an opportunity few English girls could fathom. There, Anne imbibed the art of diplomacy, refined etiquette, and the intricate choreography of European politics. Yet, it was in France where Anne's brilliance truly shone. Spending years in the sophisticated courts of Queen Claude and Queen Margaret of Navarre, she honed her skills in the language of influence. Anne stood out from her peers with her mastery of conversation and intrigue instead of focusing on traditional activities like embroidery. When she returned to England in the early 1520s, she possessed a unique blend of sophistication and ambition, setting her apart from others. Despite not fitting the standard beauty ideals, Anne captivated with her intelligence. Vibrant eyes, melodious voice, and graceful yet purposeful movements. Unlike many women of her time, she refused to fade into the background and was determined to leverage her charm and intellect for power. Anne's return to England marked the beginning of a new chapter, where she emerged as a formidable figure, challenging the norms of the court with her striking appearance and sharp wit. Anne Boleyn effortlessly conversed in French and exuded a confident laughter that few women dared to display, attracting the attention of men and sparking gossip among women at court. The murmurs surrounding the stunning Boleyn girl eventually reached the king himself, Henry VIII, who was well versed in flirtation within his court, a realm of whispered promises and clandestine affairs. However, Anne's demeanor was unlike others. She didn't succumb to his compliments or readily embrace his advances, but instead playfully challenged and resisted him. This unconventional approach intrigued Henry, who, accustomed to immediate adoration, found himself increasingly drawn to her as she maintained a certain distance. Their correspondence overflowed with professions of love, frustration, and yearning, with Henry offering her the coveted position of royal mistress, a powerful but unofficial role at court. Surprisingly, Anne declined, refusing to become just another fleeting conquest. Instead, she demanded that if Henry truly desired her, he must make her his wife. A daring move that stunned the court, given the king's existing marriage to Queen Catherine, backed by the people and the Holy Roman Emperor. The audacious decision to challenge the church and society itself did not deter Anne, who had learned from her experiences in the European courts the art of leveraging ambition to shape her own fate. In the midst of the candlelit halls of the English court, Anne Boleyn made a resolute choice, not to be merely admired, but to alter her own destiny and that of England forever. Thus, what originated as a passionate flirtation between King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn evolved into a transformative journey. A national crisis was brewing due to Henry's intense obsession to marry Anne at any cost, even if it meant upending England's traditional values. King Henry VIII's determination to divorce Queen Catherine of Aragon sparked controversy, as she had been his loyal wife for 20 years, deemed the rightful queen by both God and the English people. Despite the Pope's prior approval of their marriage, Henry justified ending it by claiming it was cursed, since Catherine had previously been married to his brother Arthur. Anne strategically kept herself at a distance, subtly encouraging Henry, while positioning herself to potentially become England's queen. The court was divided, as noble families vied for Anne's favor, or stood by Queen Catherine. Henry's relentless pursuit of divorce caused tension with powerful allies of Catherine, including Emperor Charles V. Henry's frustration grew as he faced opposition from the church and diplomatic pressures, realizing that achieving his goal wouldn't be easy. Guidance, customs, and increasingly even the legal system itself influenced his pursuit of Anne. Their courtship had evolved beyond personal longing to pose a challenge to the very foundations of England's political and religious structure. Anne wasn't merely winning the affection of a king, she was pulling an entire nation into unfamiliar territory. A risky competition had commenced, and there was no retreat from it. After enduring nearly 7 tumultuous years of strategy, disgrace, and diplomatic turmoil, Anne Boleyn's risky move paid off. In January 1533, she wed Henry VIII in secret, a bold decision, considering he was still officially wed to Catherine of Aragon, according to the Pope and most of Europe. By June, Anne was crowned as the Queen of England in a grand coronation at Westminster Abbey. This should have been the pinnacle of her life, but the mood was far from universally celebratory. The citizens of London observed with tired expressions. Some cheered, some whispered prayers for Queen Catherine. Many pondered whether this new queen, with her bold French manners and daring attitude, would be a blessing or a curse. Anne ascended the throne not as a beloved figure, but as a force of nature. In contrast to Catherine, who epitomized traditional English values of modesty and devotion, Anne was dazzling, provocative, and politically astute. She donned vibrant attire, led the court with sharp wit, and made formidable foes swiftly. Her position, though seemingly secure, was also precariously fragile. Everything hinged on one thing: providing Henry with a male heir. Anne grasped this reality as acutely as anyone. She was no longer just Henry's paramour. She was the beacon of a dynasty. In the early stages of her pregnancy, Anne and Henry were overjoyed, convinced that the child would be a son. However, in September 1533, Anne delivered a daughter, Elizabeth. To her credit, she concealed her disappointment. Despite experiencing deep disappointment gracefully, the hope remained that their next child would be a son. Henry, previously filled with admiration, now displayed uncertainty in his flickering eyes. Despite this, Anne enjoyed a period of prominence, revolutionizing the English court to resemble her own image. She raised her family's status to unprecedented levels, making history as the first English queen to be anointed with sacred oil typically reserved for kings. Her influence extended far and wide, with foreign envoys seeking her favor and diplomats reshuffling alliances to gain her approval. Henry, once submissive, officially led England away from Rome, establishing the Church of England with himself as its leader to secure Anne's position. However, as whispers circulated among friends and rivals lurked, Henry's wavering attention turned elsewhere, despite Anne's significant accomplishments. Anne had achieved remarkable heights, but the challenges of maintaining her position proved daunting. Her struggles centered on the pressure to bear a male heir, a task that led to heartbreaking miscarriages, weakening her physically and emotionally. Each loss eroded the foundation of her reign, causing Henry to distance himself, leading to tensions between them. Anne, known for her outspoken nature, vehemently argued against her circumstances. Anne fought adamantly to maintain her position, but Henry, a ruler who valued submission as much as physical attractiveness, grew weary of her sharpness and defiance, qualities that had once attracted him. Around them, adversaries were amassing like predators. Many aristocrats who had begrudgingly accepted Anne's ascent now openly plotted against her. Catherine of Aragon's loyalists held a deep-seated grudge against Anne, feeling she had committed theft and sacrilege. Even common people murmured disapprovingly of her, blaming her for the rift with Rome and the drastic changes that ensued. Then came Jane Seymour, a serene and modest figure who contrasted with Anne in every way. Jane seized Henry's wandering affection at a time when Anne's influence was waning. As Anne tried desperately to regain her footing by showering Henry with attention, promising more heirs, and pleading for his patience, the king, known for his fickleness, was already envisioning a life without the woman for whom he had caused such turmoil. Anne, always perceptive, sensed the shift occurring. Her political adversaries, including her former ally Thomas Cromwell, observed the changing dynamic and set the stage for a destructive campaign by quietly amassing allegations, rumors, and witnesses. Anne, who had skillfully navigated the perilous realm of ambition to secure her crown, found herself losing ground in the ruthless environment of Henry's court, where past triumphs held little weight. Success in the present was all that mattered, and Anne's foes were preparing to strike. The queen, who had brought a realm to its knees, would soon experience how swiftly a realm could turn against her. Anne Boleyn's detractors waged their assault not with armies or weapons, but with insidious whispers, concealed truths, and meticulously crafted falsehoods. In the shadowy recesses, betrayal brewed silently in the court, as Thomas Cromwell, once Anne's strong supporter in the English Reformation, turned against her. Their partnership stemmed from shared ambitions, but had now shifted due to conflicting interests. While Anne sought reforms to aid the poor and curb the power of greedy nobles, Cromwell prioritized stability, pleasing Henry, and avoiding disruptions. Anne's audacity posed a threat, and Henry's affection had transformed into annoyance, distrust, and detachment. Anne found herself with dwindling allies, and her charisma, previously advantageous, clashed with the court's desire for a more compliant queen. Jane Seymour, composed and strategic, lingered in the background, contrasting with Anne's diminishing influence. Cromwell took the initial step, recognizing Henry's restlessness and desire for an excuse to remove Anne without the disgrace of divorce. The accusations, including adultery, incest, and conspiracy against the king, were exaggerated and designed to vilify Anne. Despite the illogical and inconsistent nature of the charges, truth in Henry's court was subjective. Anne fought against the mounting evidence by appealing to their past love, but Henry's indifference signaled her downfall. In May 1536, Anne was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London, marking the beginning of the end for the once influential queen. As the gate closed loudly behind her, she came to a realization. No longer was she a queen. She found herself trapped in a prison, a pawn in the cruel game she had once dominated. Betrayal had sealed her fate. Alone in the tower, Anne Boleyn awaited the final move. Standing in the grand hall of the Tower of London, Anne faced a panel of nobles, many of whom owed their status and wealth to her ascent. Now they judged her, distant and observant, ready to erase the woman who had once altered England's course. Shocking accusations were leveled against her: adultery with various men, including her brother George Boleyn, high treason, and plotting against the king. In a different time, such charges against a queen would have been unthinkable. However, here and now, they were merely a show, a grim act tailored to satisfy King Henry VII's desires. Anne's downfall masked by a thin veneer of legality. With the same passion that had once captivated Henry's heart, Anne defended herself. She refuted each allegation with intellect, precision, and a steadfast calm that even impressed her adversaries. She asserted her anointment as Queen of England, designated by divine oil and chosen by God. She recounted her loyalty, sacrifices, and love, yet her efforts were in vain. The judgment had been made long before Anne entered the courtroom. The trial served as a spectacle for the court and the public, an unveiling of a once indomitable woman. Witness after witness, many manipulated or bribed, uttered condemning testimonies. Testimonies conflicted in dates and locations. Evidence was feeble, if it existed at all. However, the truth held no importance now. Anne was declared guilty. Her brother George and her acquaintances met a similar fate. The men who were accused alongside her also received death sentences. Anne's fate was to be executed by beheading, a more merciful punishment compared to the usual death penalty for traitors, which involved hanging, drawing, and quartering. Despite remaining composed when the verdict was announced, Anne stood tall with a pale face but a strong spirit. Before being taken back to her cell, she spoke confidently, expressing readiness to die and praying for mercy from God. As the heavy doors of the courtroom closed, a sense of relief washed over the spectators. Although they thought the storm caused by Anne, brilliant, dangerous, and unforgettable, was coming to an end, they failed to realize that they were not erasing her. They were immortalizing her through betrayal, tragedy, and legend. Subsequent to her trial, Anne was returned to the Tower of London, not as the once powerful Queen of England, but as a condemned prisoner awaiting her demise. Nevertheless, Anne remained resolute even in the face of death. Within the cold, echoing walls of the tower, she dedicated hours to prayer, kneeling on the unforgiving stone floors with clasped hands and unwavering voice, refusing to admit to any wrongdoing as she believed she was innocent. She expressed readiness for death, hoping it would bring peace to the kingdom and show mercy to her young daughter, Elizabeth. Anne's loyal ladies-in-waiting shed silent tears, while she took it upon herself to comfort them, making bitter jokes about being remembered as a queen who lost her head. Her dark humor contained the same resilient spark that had made her unforgettable. Meanwhile, King Henry VIII remained steadfastly unforgiving. Jane Seymour had already captured his attention. Henry was busy arranging his next marriage even before finalizing Anne's execution date, marking the ultimate betrayal by the man who had once defied a kingdom for her. Informed on May 18, 1536, that she would die the following morning, Anne spent a restless night in prayer, seeking forgiveness for herself and those who had wronged her due to her ambitious and prideful past. Henry, in a show of compassion, arranged for a French swordsman for a quicker and less brutal execution than the axe, more likely to ease his conscience than Anne's discomfort. At daybreak, Anne, dressed meticulously in a dignified dark gray gown with fur trim and a crimson undercoat, symbolizing sacrifice and dignity. With her dark hair pinned up and tucked under a simple cap, she prepared to meet her fate with grace. Stepping forward in the tower's misty courtyard on that cold morning, Anne Boleyn, queen, mother, survivor, and warrior, faced her end with courage. No tears or pleas, only an act of bravery in the eyes of history. Although her story was just unfolding, on the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn climbed the scaffold within the Tower of London, where a somber crowd, including courtiers, guards, and a handful of witnesses, observed in silence. Standing tall, her gray gown gently fluttering in the brisk breeze, Anne appeared thinner and paler than her courtly days, yet exuded a sense of calm resolve. No, in a scene filled with emotions but devoid of wailing sobs, Anne faced death with the same fierce grace that had once caused a kingdom to tremble. Deliberating over her final words, she chose them cautiously, not to accuse or defend herself. Instead, she offered prayers for the well-being of the king who had forsaken her, exhibiting forgiveness rather than admitting guilt. Anne's display of courage in her last moments left even her onlookers astonished. The French executioner, summoned to ensure a swift execution, approached as Anne knelt upright, her hands clasped in prayer, gazing upwards. With a white cloth covering her eyes, she remained serene as the sword descended swiftly and soundlessly, bringing an end to Anne Boleyn, the Queen, Mother, and Trailblazer. Hastily interred in an unmarked grave on the Tower grounds, she was laid to rest in an arrow chest due to the absence of a proper coffin, a stark contrast to her golden-crowned coronation. Nevertheless, Anne's story did not conclude within that cold tomb. Her daughter Elizabeth, the offspring whose arrival had disappointed a king, ascended to become one of England's most remarkable monarchs. Elizabeth I, the esteemed Virgin Queen, oversaw the pinnacle of English achievement in art, power, and global dominance. Inheriting her mother's boldness, intellect, and tenacity, Elizabeth triumphantly carried on Anne's legacy. Anne Boleyn's influence reshaped the direction of England forever, instigating the split from Rome and the establishment of the Church of England. Her demise served as a reminder that even queens could be discarded. Yet through her bloodline, particularly her daughter Elizabeth, Anne's impact shone brighter than any crown she had ever worn. In the end, Anne Boleyn emerged victorious in her own unique way. Immortality was not achieved through her mere survival, but rather through the lasting impact she made on history. By the early 1770s, the American colonies were in turmoil, resembling a pot left unattended over a blazing fire. The once proud mother country, Britain, had now fostered feelings of resentment, suspicion, and escalating anger among the colonists. The strained relationship did not originate with the infamous Boston Tea Party. Preceding events such as the Stamp Act, which imposed taxes on various goods, and the Townshend Acts, which taxed essentials like paper and glass, had already incensed the colonists. Each new law enacted by a distant parliament, without colonial representation, served as a catalyst, igniting the flames of discontent. Initially, the colonists expressed their outrage through petitions, pamphlets, protests by colonial assemblies, boycotts organized by merchants, and impassioned writings by figures like Samuel Adams and John Dickinson. However, as time passed, their frustration metamorphosed into a somber realization that their grievances fell on deaf ears in Britain. The hope persisted among many colonists that by voicing their dissent and presenting logical arguments, the oppressive taxes would be repealed. While there were instances like the successful repeal of the Stamp Act due to colonial uproar, each triumph was swiftly followed by new laws, taxes, and affronts. The colonists' fury was not primarily about the financial burden, as the taxes were relatively modest compared to those in Britain. What truly enraged them was the violation of their rights, being taxed without consent, treated as mere subjects rather than citizens, and governed as distant possessions rather than valued partners. Boston emerged as a central hub of resistance, with the Sons of Liberty, an impassioned group of patriots, leading the charge. The mounting tensions eventually erupted in violence in 1770, when British soldiers opened fire. The Boston Massacre involved British soldiers firing on unarmed civilians, leading to blood staining the cobblestones and eroding trust. By 1773, the colonies were on the brink of defiance. Parliament's critical mistake was the Tea Act of 1773, an attempt to save the struggling British East India Company by selling cheaper tea directly to the colonies. Despite the apparent benefits, the colonists were incensed because the act maintained the tax on tea and symbolized taxation without representation. The news of the Tea Act sparked anger among merchants and patriots, especially in Boston, setting the stage for a significant shift in history. After enduring the Boston Massacre and experiencing prolonged economic challenges, Boston residents saw through the Tea Act's facade and viewed it as a deceptive ploy. Rejecting the tea became a matter of pride, serving as a test of allegiance to the cause of freedom. Public gatherings multiplied. Newspapers blazed with passionate speeches, and groups such as the Sons of Liberty, under the leadership of Samuel Adams and others, coordinated boycotts, pledging no East India Company tea would be unloaded, sold, or consumed in America. Throughout the colonies, ships carrying the contentious tea were rebuffed by local opposition. From New York to Charleston, the resounding message was clear. They could not be swayed. However, in Boston, events took a different turn. 3 ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, arrived, anchored in the harbor, and remained steadfast, refusing to depart. Despite royal officials' demands to unload the tea, the colonists stood their ground, resulting in a deadlock akin to a taut bowstring. The escalating tension became unbearable, with a single action poised to alter history forever. As the obstinate British tea vessel lingered in Boston Harbor, the city transformed into a volatile environment. Each passing day without a resolution heightened the suspense. Boston was not just resisting, it was gearing up for confrontation. In alehouses, churches, and public squares, enraged colonists deliberated on their next steps. The Sons of Liberty, guided by passionate leaders like Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Paul Revere, mobilized swiftly to rally against the oppression. Public announcements urging citizens to boycott British tea were posted, and tumultuous assemblies attracted a diverse crowd of farmers, craftsmen, and traders. Every gathering added momentum to the cause. The Old South Meeting House emerged as the epicenter of the resistance, as thousands crammed into the wooden structure, their heated discussions filling the foggy air with anticipation. Defiance was on the rise as resolutions were passed, speeches were delivered, and emotions flared in this pivotal moment. Each vote against unloading the imported tea signified a blow to British authority. Despite Bostonians' unity, the clock was ticking as British regulations required tea unloading and tax payment within a strict 20-day time frame. Failure to comply would result in customs officials seizing the cargo forcefully. The Sons of Liberty comprehended that surrendering to the tax, even under protest, would signify a loss of principle. The issue extended beyond tea, encompassing whether the colonies would passively accept subjugation without rights or take a stand for their future. Meanwhile, Governor Thomas Hutchinson remained firm, insisting on adherence to the law and refusing to release the tea-laden ships. The city witnessed a tense standoff, with the looming sense of an impending event palpable among its residents. An undercurrent of decision-making was subtly brewing in Boston, a plan that would resonate globally. December 16, 1773, brought a chilly, overcast morning to Boston, a city teetering on the brink of historic change. For nearly 3 weeks, the tea-laden ships had loomed in the harbor like imminent threats. Now, the ultimate deadline had arrived, mandating tea unloading and tax settlement within the stipulated 20-day period per British law. The arrival of a ship was crucial. Failure to comply with customs regulations could lead to cargo seizure and potential intervention by British troops. The significance of the situation was well understood by all, as allowing the tea to come ashore would compromise their principles and jeopardize their fight for rights and freedom. On that morning, A large crowd gathered at the Old South Meeting House in Boston, including colonists who had traveled long distances to attend. The hall was overflowing with attendees, with some spilling out onto the streets to listen to impassioned speeches denouncing the Tea Act and calling for action against tyranny. Despite the strong defiance, there was an air of uncertainty about how to proceed without inciting a full-blown conflict. As the day progressed, messengers arrived with unsettling news that Governor Thomas Hutchinson was adamant about enforcing the tax and seizing the tea. This news fueled the crowd's anger, but Samuel Adams calmly declared that the meeting had reached a decision point. With a simple sentence, he signaled the end of discussions and the beginning of action. A war cry outside signaled the start of their plan, prompting attendees to quickly disguise themselves in preparation for what was to come. The disguise as Mohawk warriors was not meant to deceive, but to send a clear message. As night fell on Boston on December 16, 1773, the streets came alive with ordinary men in makeshift garb, symbolizing a new identity and a defiant stance. They silently gathered at Griffin's Wharf, armed with weapons, and swiftly took action on the 3 tea ships without causing harm to the crew. The chests of tea were destroyed, throwing the contents into the cold harbor waters, while spectators and British guards looked on without interference, possibly due to uncertainty, empathy, or a recognition of the changing situation. Tonight, the unstoppable force was discipline at its finest. Not a single cargo was taken illicitly. No ships were plundered for their treasures. Only the despised symbol of British tyranny, the tea, was the target. In a town where scarcity and privation were part of daily life, the men could have easily used the protest as an excuse for looting, but they did not. After the chaos, the harbor appeared as a turbulent cauldron with torn chests and wet tea leaves swirling within. The mingling scents of the sea and crushed tea filled the night air with an unusual bittersweet aroma. Their task completed, the men silently slipped away into the night, melting into the narrow passageways and lanes of Boston without leaving any trace but the undeniable imprint of revolution. As the final shattered crates bobbed in the shadowy waters, Boston stood motionless, almost as if holding its breath. The Boston Tea Party was not a wild disturbance, a scuffle, or a drunken revelry. Instead, it was a far more uncommon occurrence, a deliberate, cool act of rebellion unfolding under the cover of darkness. The harbor transformed into a massive teapot, with thousands of pounds of East India Company tea forming dark mats on the water's surface. Despite some colonists' inquisitiveness and spirit of defiance, who attempted to scoop up soaked leaves from the harbor, they were reprimanded by the vigilant Sons of Liberty patrolling the docks. Nothing was to be salvaged. No one was to benefit from that night's endeavors. It was all about principle, straightforward and unadulterated. The town awoke the following day to the strong scent of briny tea lingering in the air. News of the event spread rapidly through word of mouth, letters, and printed broadsheets. By midday, individuals ranging from apprentices to merchants were informed of what had taken place, sparking differing opinions and discussions. Patriots felt a strong sense of pride, a fierce and swelling pride, knowing that ordinary men had defied the powerful empire and fought for freedom. Loyalists and moderates were horrified by the destruction of property, viewing it as reckless and dangerous. They feared that the colonies had crossed a line from which they could not turn back. Governor Thomas Hutchinson was enraged in his mansion, not only by the destruction itself, but also by the message it conveyed. If the king's authority could be openly challenged in Boston, where else might rebellion ignite? British officials were shocked by the unexpected level of organization and discipline displayed by the revolutionaries as they calmly destroyed royal property worth tens of thousands of pounds without causing any damage. The ship's captains, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, the Beaver, could only watch helplessly as their cargo sank beneath the waves. The financial loss would be recorded at over $10,000, but the true loss was in trust, loyalty, and the belief that Britain ruled the colonies with their consent. The sinking of the T symbolized a deeper truth emerging. The era of peaceful protests was fading, and Boston was preparing for a reckoning. The news of the Boston Tea Party reaching London prompted a swift and furious reaction. British officials saw it not just as a protest, but as a rebellious challenge to royal authority that could not be overlooked. King George III was reportedly furious upon hearing the news, and Parliament, already frustrated with colonial defiance, erupted in anger. The demand for repercussions was loud, not just for Boston, but as a deterrent for all American colonies. Harsh laws, quickly dubbed intolerable acts in America, were implemented. The Boston Port Act, the first blow, swiftly ordered the closing of Boston's harbor until payment for the destroyed tea was made and order restored. This action led to a halt in trade, resulting in a quiet and stagnant Boston. Further punishment ensued with the Massachusetts Government Act, removing the colony's self-governing rights, and the Administration of Justice Act, allowing royal officials accused of crimes to be tried in Britain. British soldiers were stationed in Boston to reinforce the message that rebellion would be quashed. However, rather than intimidating the colonies into submission, these acts evoked outrage and sparked unity among them. The suffering of Boston caused a surge of sympathy and support from neighboring colonies, drawing the once fragmented colonies closer together. Britain's intention to make an example of Boston backfired, turning the city into a symbol and a call to action for the American colonies. The resistance against British rule was ignited when the flames of revolution spread rapidly from one colony to another, making it difficult to suppress. The impactful punishment imposed on Boston had repercussions far beyond Massachusetts, unifying the American colonies in anger and determination. Previously distant and competitive, the colonies recognized the need to stand together after witnessing the harsh treatment of Boston by the British Parliament. This solidarity was evident as colonists from various regions rushed to aid Boston with supplies and support. The convening of the Continental Congress in September 1774 marked a historic moment, where representatives from 12 colonies gathered to discuss a unified response to British oppression. Though the initial goal was reconciliation, the growing movement hinted at a deeper desire for independence. The Congress agreed on a boycott of British goods and pledged solidarity against further British oppression, signaling a shift towards collective action among the colonies. A warning was issued that any assault on a single colony would be viewed as an assault on all colonies. As common folks spoke openly in public venues about unity, resistance, and liberty, sentiments that were once kept private began to surface. While Britain had hoped to crush rebellion by targeting Boston, their actions inadvertently united the colonies in a more formidable way. The colonies were starting to identify themselves not as separate regions, but as Americans, despite their differences. The revolution was no longer just brewing. It was evolving into a powerful force that Britain could not halt. The dumping of tea in Boston Harbor didn't just destroy crates. It shattered the belief that the colonies would forever remain loyal subjects. The Boston Tea Party sparked a flame that no ruler or authority could extinguish. This spark ignited resistance across the colonies, turning peaceful protests and petitions into bold defiance. Militias openly trained, stockpiling ammunition, as thoughts of revolution echoed in taverns once loyal to King George III. Boston, resilient despite its hardships, became a symbol of sacrifice. The tighter Britain's hold, the slipperier the colonies became. The sight of ships passing the silent Boston harbor served as a reminder of American defiance against tyranny. The intolerable acts meant to subdue the colonies instead elevated Boston as a martyr city and a rallying point. From Georgia to New Hampshire, colonists realized the strength that came from solidarity. The destinies of the individuals were interconnected. The act of resistance had evolved beyond just tea. It now symbolized survival, identity, and freedom. By the spring of 1775, tensions escalated outside Boston to a critical point. In Lexington and Concord, British troops encountered armed farmers instead of colonial weapons to confiscate. These ordinary men were prepared to defend their rights with muskets, marking the beginning of the American Revolution. The Boston Tea Party demonstrated that revolutions don't always begin with grand gestures, but can quietly start with a small group defying fear. This act signified a rejection not only of a tax, but also of an empire. Despite the challenging and uncertain path ahead, the colonies had made it clear that they were no longer loyal subjects, but revolutionaries. Before the ancient wonders like the pyramids of Giza, bustling Mesopotamian cities, or Stonehenge, there existed Corral, located in the arid coastal valleys of Peru. Corral rose to prominence almost 5,000 years ago and then faded into obscurity, hidden by sands and forgotten by history. Carroll remained undiscovered for centuries, emerging in an unlikely landscape that might have seemed inhospitable to civilization. In this barren landscape emerged one of the earliest great cities of humanity. Carroll wasn't just a cluster of scattered dwellings or a temporary trading hub. It was a meticulously planned urban center sprawling over 150 acres, teeming with pyramids, plazas, living quarters, and ceremonial sites. It exhibited grandeur, purpose, and foresight, evolving into a sophisticated society long before the Egyptians embarked on their pyramid-building endeavors. The people of Corral accomplished this feat without the aid of the wheel, written language, or metal tools. They constructed imposing edifices from stone and earth through innovative thinking, communal cooperation, and sheer determination. Despite its monumental achievements, Corral remained concealed for millennia, even when travelers encountered the peculiar weathered mounds dotting the valley. They deemed them to be natural formations, sculpted by the desert winds, unaware of the ancient city beneath the sand. This prehistoric urban center predates renowned civilizations in history. It wasn't until the late 20th century that archaeologists, led by Ruth Shady, unearthed Corral's concealed legacy. Their discoveries, buried in the sands of time, revolutionized the narrative of the Americas and prompted a reassessment of conventional beliefs regarding the origins of civilization. Carroll thrived and declined in obscurity, but now, after thousands of years of silence, its remnants are telling a tale once more. They hint at a sophisticated, peaceful populace that crafted a realm of intricacy and marvel in a seemingly uninhabitable terrain, revealing only the prelude to their saga. At first observation, the Sup Valley appears inhospitable, with harsh winds whipping across vast expanses of sand and rock, and the relentless sun parching the land. Under the unforgiving sun, the land baked into cracked, brittle sheets, with water being scarce, and the river resembling a weak thread struggling for existence. To the untrained observer, it appeared to be a forsaken wasteland, devoid of life and abandoned by higher powers. However, the residents of Corral perceived it differently. They did not view the desert with fear, but rather as a vast canvas awaiting transformation. They understood the importance of the river, no matter how modest, as a source of endless possibilities. Through patience, resourcefulness, and unwavering determination, they managed to convert this harsh environment into a flourishing sanctuary of vitality and civilization. Their initial triumph came in the form of agriculture. They mastered the river's seasonal floods, creating basic yet ingenious irrigation systems that directed water throughout the valley. Instead of seeing only sand and dust, they cultivated green sprouts of optimism. Cotton, beans, squash, guava, and sweet potatoes thrived, with cotton becoming a prized possession. It was transformed into fishing nets and textiles, fostering trade with coastal communities and establishing bonds that extended far beyond their desert habitat. However, cultivating crops was merely one aspect of their expertise. The people of Corral recognized that survival in the desert demanded harmony. They cooperated with nature rather than opposing it. Their dwellings and plazas were constructed from materials capable of enduring extreme heat and occasional fierce rains that swept the valley. They meticulously studied the stars and seasons, meticulously planning their harvests like seasoned astronomers. Trade formed the lifeblood of Corral's economy, as dried fish, cotton, fruits, and handmade products traversed the coast. In return, they received exotic items, including colorful shells from the Pacific, rare stones from the Andes, and innovative concepts from distant societies. Instead of being isolated, they were interconnected. In a place where survival seemed unattainable, Corral prospered through intellect, creativity, and communal unity. They did not conquer the desert with dot force, but rather with collaboration and adaptation. Through sheer determination and understanding, the inhabitants of Corral embraced the forces of nature, forming a highly functional and exceptional society. Corral emerged as a symbol of civilization against all odds, its pyramids standing tall in the desert, defying all preconceptions of early American civilizations. These architectural marvels were not simple structures, but massive creations displaying vision, organization, and ambition. The main pyramid, towering over the desert, showcased engineering skills comparable to ancient wonders of the world. Over 5 millennia, it stood firm against the elements and seismic activities. Unlike Egyptian tombs, Corral's pyramids were hubs of ceremonies, power, and communal life, with temples and gathering areas at their tops, accessible via grand staircases. The surrounding plazas, circular and sunken, provided spaces for religious events, political assemblies, and communal festivities, reflecting a community that valued unity and structure. Residential areas encircled the pyramids, indicating a tightly knit society deeply connected to one another and the universe. Corral was a thriving community housing priests, administrators, artisans, and farmers. The pyramids strategically situated and aligned with celestial occurrences, such as sunrises and solstices, indicated a deep connection with cosmic events. The people of Corral viewed architecture as more than practical. It was also spiritual, mathematical, and cosmic. Walking amidst the ancient stones today instills a profound sense of wonder. Despite being constructed without advanced tools, wheels, or beasts of burden, these structures exhibited extraordinary symmetry, scale, and accuracy. The majestic pyramids of Corral weren't erected for show or warfare. Rather, they were designed to bridge the earthly and the celestial, uniting the community and the cosmos, humanity and eternity. Even now, these silent monuments bear witness, preserving a narrative that refuses to fade away. Among the ruins of Corral lies a remarkable difference that distinguishes it from other ancient civilizations. Absent are weapons buried in its sands, defensive walls enclosing its plazas, or mass graves hinting at violent conquests or internal conflicts. Unlike empires that thrived and perished through warfare, Corral was a society founded on peace, a revelation that challenges preconceived notions. This civilization prospered not through aggression, but through collaboration, commerce, and shared ideologies. The inhabitants of Corral directed their efforts towards not armies or fortifications, but towards architecture, astronomy, music, and communal interactions. Their plazas and pyramids were not symbols of triumph over foes, but rather hubs of festivity, reverence, and governance. They were a society that opted for unity over conquest, negotiation over destruction. Trade played a pivotal role in Corral's prosperity. Cotton, harvested along the fertile riverside, was woven into fishing nets and exchanged with coastal settlements for dried fish, a crucial protein source. The region was connected by a vast trade network, comprising exotic goods like colorful shells from the Pacific, precious stones from the highlands, and rare tropical fruits from distant valleys. This network fostered unity among the communities, making Corral a thriving cultural and economic center. Social harmony was maintained through religious and ceremonial practices, with the city's grand public spaces likely hosting rituals that united people through shared spiritual beliefs. Music, created with flutes made from condor bones and drums from deer hides, resonated through the desert, connecting individuals to something larger. Leadership in Corral relied more on spiritual authority and civic organization than military strength, overseeing construction projects, agricultural cycles, and trade agreements without resorting to war. As a rare example in an era marked by conflict, Corral showcased that civilization could be built through collaboration, creativity, and trust rather than conquest. The ancient city was not just about buildings and trade, but also about the vibrancy of music, ceremony, and spiritual rhythm that infused its civilization. Excavations unearthed a collection of ancient instruments, flutes crafted from condors and pelicans' bones, whistles from deer antlers, and small drums with animal hides, demonstrating the meticulous craftsmanship devoted to creating these artifacts. The city of Corral resonated with specific musical tones intended to carry melodies through its expansive plazas. In an era devoid of written communication, music served as a means of expressing inner emotions. Envision the deep reverberations of drums as night fell, flutes echoing like the winds of the desert, and the rhythmic stomping of feet in the sunken plazas, filled with a gathering crowd under the diminishing sunlight. Bonfires crackled atop pyramid structures, as priests adorned in intricate woven attire chanted hymns to the deities of the land, water, and skies. During those instances, Corral transcended being just a city. It transformed into a symphony. The city's design itself indicated that ceremonial practices were fundamental. The expansive plazas were more than just open areas. They were platforms for communal rites meticulously crafted to bring people together. Circular sunken courts acted as ancient amphitheaters, directing attention and sound towards the ceremonies held at their centers. Towering above all were the pyramids, not as burial grounds, but as sacred peaks constructed by human hands, bridging the earthly realm to the celestial above. Rituals likely commemorated the changing seasons, agricultural cycles, and celestial events. Music served as a connection point between individuals, nature, the divine, and the enigmatic unknown. Corral lacked violent depictions, war deities, or gory rituals. Instead, its spiritual realm exuded harmony, festivity, and veneration. Even today, as the desert wind whispers through the remnants, one can almost catch faint echoes of ancient melodies. These forgotten tunes belong to a civilization that discovered beauty, significance, and unity amidst the harsh, vast sands. Corral wasn't solely a hub of music, commerce, and tradition. It stood as a marvel of engineering, a testament to human ingenuity. Human ingenuity thrived in one of the harshest environments on the planet, when the people of Corral built a city from stone and earth that has stood for almost 5,000 years. Despite lacking metal tools, wheels, or draft animals, they achieved remarkable feats. Enormous pyramids emerged from the desert ground, made not from fragile bricks, but from massive stones transported across the valley using ingenious baskets woven from local riverbank plants. By carefully layering stones and rubble, they constructed sturdy structures that could withstand the test of time and nature's forces. Their knowledge of earthquake-resistant architecture ensured that their pyramids and plazas survived the region's frequent tremors by employing flexible building methods, wide foundations, and rounded corners to absorb seismic energy. Water management was another success story, as they developed advanced irrigation systems to sustain agriculture in the arid landscape. Their city layout showcased exceptional urban planning, with structures aligned to astronomical points and sunken plazas serving as tools for celestial observation. The intricate organization of residential, administrative, and ceremonial areas reflected a sophisticated society living in harmony. Living a communal life surrounded by sacred spaces, the inhabitants of Corral constructed not only for their present needs, but also for the prosperity of future generations. Today, modern engineers are amazed by Corral's durability, realizing that true greatness goes beyond technological advancements. Sometimes, the most profound wisdom lies in comprehending the natural forces and cooperating with the land rather than opposing it. Corral's sturdy stones have weathered storms, earthquakes, and the relentless passage of time, standing as a silent tribute to a society that turned their aspirations into reality amidst the desert. Flourishing for centuries, the city of Corral symbolized peace, music, trade, and remarkable architectural achievements in the desert. Yet, it faded into obscurity almost imperceptibly, with no fires, signs of conquest, or dramatic events marking its decline. Its plazas emptied, its pyramids succumbed to the shifting sands, and its once vibrant culture fell silent. The question of why they departed still haunts the landscape of the Super Valley. Some scholars speculate that environmental changes, possibly a prolonged drought that devastated agriculture, dealt the final blow to Corral. The absence of the river's nourishing waters may have caused crops to fail, disrupting trade networks relying on surplus cotton and food. Without the delicate equilibrium with nature that Corral had maintained, its demise became inevitable. Alternatively, theories suggest that changing trade routes and the rise of new centers of power along the coast and inland led to a decline in Corral's influence. It's plausible that the city's supplies of cotton, fish, and produce were no longer sufficient to uphold its dominance, resulting in the gradual decline of its commercial activities. Furthermore, some speculate about internal issues contributing to Corral's downfall, but without written records, we can only speculate. Political conflicts, religious turmoil, or sheer exhaustion after centuries of development could have contributed to the decline. Even harmonious communities may fracture when faced with uncertainty about their survival. It appears that the decline of Corral was gradual rather than sudden, with families likely leaving one by one in search of more fertile lands or fresh starts. The children who once played in the plazas of Corral grew up recounting tales of a lost city, which eventually faded into legend. The desert slowly took back what humans had constructed, covering stone temples with sand carried by the winds and bearing flutes beneath shifting dunes. A once thriving civilization turned into a field of dormant mounds, shrouded in silence. Remaining hidden for nearly 4,000 years, Corral lay beneath the sand waiting to be rediscovered. Today, as archaeologists carefully unearth its remnants, the mystery persists. How can a city of such sophistication and beauty vanish without a trace? It could be that even the most advanced and peaceful civilizations are fragile entities in the vast fabric of time, susceptible to unseen forces of change. Corral remained forgotten for millennia, concealed beneath the silent sands of the Super Valley. Travelers passed by the peculiar rounded hills scattered across the landscape, unaware that beneath the surface lay the ruins of a civilization predating Egypt's pyramids. These hills were dismissed as natural formations shaped by wind and erosion. Only in the late 20th century did Corral's story resurface. In the 1990s, Peruvian archaeologist Ruth Shady and her team ventured into the Soup Valley, driven by curiosity and a hunch that these hills held undisclosed secrets. Their discoveries would revolutionize the narrative of human civilization in the Americas. With meticulous care, layer by layer, they removed the sand. Beneath the surface lay walls crafted from meticulously cut stone, grand staircases, sunken plazas, and pyramids, revealing a city of remarkable age. Radiocarbon dating confirmed the astonishing truth. Corral was more than 4,600 years old, existing concurrently with the earliest civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. This groundbreaking revelation challenged the established beliefs in the field of archaeology. Until Corral's discovery, experts had assumed that civilizations in the Americas emerged much later, overshadowed by the ancient empires of the Eastern Hemisphere. The findings at Corral upended this perspective, demonstrating that the Americas were home to impressive architecture, sophisticated urban life, and social structures long before the rise of the Inca or the Maya. Ruth Shady and her team unearthed not only stone structures, but also remnants of daily life, including musical instruments, fishing equipment, textiles, quippus, ancient records tied in knots, and offerings to deities. Each artifact painted a vivid picture of a people who had designed a society with foresight, intelligence, and remarkable creativity. The rediscovery of Corral was not just a scholarly achievement. It was a resurrection. After millennia, buried beneath the desert sands, this ancient civilization emerged once more, offering a glimpse into a past where plazas resonated with the sounds of flutes and the joy of children. Today, Corral holds the prestigious status of a UNESCO World Heritage Site, serving as a precious connection to humanity's early aspirations of construction, community, and faith. Though hidden for ages, the stones of Corral endured, waiting to be noticed, understood, and remembered. Standing tall as a silent monument, Corral serves as a poignant reminder that the origins of civilization run deeper than previously thought. Amidst its pyramids and plazas, the ancient stones whisper a tale that reshapes our comprehension of humanity's history. One that emphasizes cooperation and creativity rather than conquest and power struggles. Corral's history is not one of conflict and bloodshed, but of unity, creativity, and optimism. The people of Corral accomplished remarkable feats long before the powerful empires of Greece, Rome, or Egypt arose. They constructed pyramids without using wheels, navigated the stars without written documentation, and established a prosperous society centered around trade, music, rituals, and engineering, all without the scars of warfare on their land. In a time marked by battles, Corral presents a different perspective on what civilization can achieve. It was a society that prioritized connection over conquest and knowledge over control. It demonstrates that complexity doesn't necessitate violence, and that true greatness isn't determined by the size of armies on a battlefield, but by a community's ability to collaborate, innovate, and dream together. The legacy of Corral extends far beyond the arid lands of Soup Valley, challenging the traditional belief that civilization originated from a single source, and that urbanization and grand architecture were first developed in the ancient world. Corral illustrates that humanity's spirit of ingenuity and ambition emerged independently in various parts of the globe, influenced by diverse cultures, but united by the common desires to survive, celebrate, and aim for the divine. Today, as you wander among Corral's ancient ruins, you can almost sense the vibrant atmosphere, the beat of drums, the gentle melodies of flutes, the bustling sounds of marketplace deals, and the joyful laughter of children playing in stone alleys under a starlit sky. Their existence, aspirations, and tales live on, ingrained in the earth's essence. Corral teaches us that even when civilizations decline, their essence can persist, dormant beneath the sands, waiting to be remembered and to ignite inspiration once more. In the grand narrative of human history, Corral stands not just as a remnant of the past, but as a guiding light for the future, a reminder of the enduring spirit of innovation and resilience in the most unforgiving deserts and buried beneath layers of sand. The potential for awe, enlightenment, and harmony to flourish exists, giving rise to a society that aspires to reach great heights